All right, so imagine this. The year is 1930. We're in Savannah, Georgia, and we're standing in a backyard, a pretty nice one, behind a three-story row house on East Charlton Street.
You can just feel the air, right? That thick coastal Georgia humidity.
Exactly. And there's a man there. He's a cameraman for Pathé News. And he has come all the way down from New York City. And you can tell he's getting frustrated. He's sweating, fiddling with his camera.
Because he's trying to film a chicken.
He is trying to film a chicken. And this isn't just any chicken. This is supposed to be, a freak of nature in the eyes of the newsreel guys. It's a Cochin Bantam chicken.
A frizzled one, they called it.
A frizzled one, yeah. And its big claim to fame is that it can, allegedly, walk backward.
But the chicken is not having it.
Not at all. It's just, being a chicken, scratching in the dirt, pecking around. It has no interest in being a movie star. The cameraman's losing his patience. He's got a train to catch. And then a 5-year-old girl steps into the frame.
And she is dressed to the nines. A little double-breasted coat, a beret. She looks incredibly serious.
It's Miss Regal, yeah.
And she sees what's happening. She realizes the bird isn't going to perform. So what does she do? She doesn't cry. She doesn't go get her mom. She just jumps in right next to the chicken and starts walking backward herself.
That little girl, of course, is Flannery O'Connor. And you just couldn't invent a more perfect metaphor for her entire life and work.
It's everything, isn't it? It's funny, it's completely absurd, but there's this incredible stubborn will to just get the job done, but on her own terms. She literally saved the shoot.
And the footage exists. You can go online and watch this 4-second grainy black and white clip, and you see her, this wisp of curls sticking out from under her cap, and just this intense focus.
It's amazing. And years later, when she's this literary giant, she actually wrote about this moment. She said, "It marked me for life." And coming from her, a phrase like "marked me for life" carries so much weight. It wasn't just a funny childhood story for her. She connected it directly to her lifelong fascination with the grotesque, with so-called freaks.
And with her birds, with the peacocks she raised later in life.
Exactly. She had this famous line about her fame being a comic distinction shared with Roy Rogers' horse.
Yeah.
She understood, I think, from a very early age that to be distinctive often meant you had to be a little peculiar. And she leaned right into it.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We are going to trace the origins of one of America's most, truly unique literary voices. But we're not just looking at the finished product, the writer. We want to find the child, the pigeon-toed, bird-obsessed girl growing up in this very matriarchal Southern world who somehow, against all odds, reshaped American fiction.
And to do that, we're really digging into Brad Gooch's fantastic biography, which is just called Flannery. We're going to follow her from that Savannah backyard to Milledgeville through her satirical college years, and finally to the great transformation at the Iowa Writers' Workshop.
And it all starts inside that Savannah bubble. Because before she was Flannery, the Southern Gothic icon, she was Mary Flannery O'Connor, a Catholic girl in the deeply Protestant South. And that context, that religious and cultural landscape is, well, it's the bedrock of everything.
It absolutely is. You can't understand her without it.
Okay, so let's go there. Savannah, 1925. The source material notes that the weather on the day she was born was unsettled.
Which is almost too perfect, isn't it, for a writer who specialized in violent storms and, cosmic upheaval.
It really is. But Savannah itself was a complicated social map for a family like the O'Connors.
Very. You have to understand the Irish Catholic dynamic in the South back then. Yeah. There was this pretty rigid split between what they called the lace curtain Irish and the shanty Irish.
And the O'Connors were firmly lace curtain.
Oh, absolutely. They were respectable. They were middle to upper class. They lived on Lafayette Square, which was, the absolute epicenter of Catholic life in the city, right across the street from the magnificent Cathedral of St. John the Baptist. They were society people.
But with an asterisk next to their name, because no matter how much money you had or how nice your address was, being Catholic in Georgia in the 1920s, that didn't exactly put you in the mainstream, did it?
Not at all.
Yeah.
You're talking about a time and place where the Klan was still very active. Anti-Catholic sentiment was. It was a real thing. It was this lingering bunker mentality for Southern Catholics. You stuck with your own people. You circled the wagons.
So from the moment she's born, Mary Flannery is growing up in this environment that's protected, it's intense, and it's constantly aware of being other. You're part of the culture, but you're also fundamentally apart from it.
And that sense of being an outsider looking in, that's the classic writer's position, isn't it? She had it from birth.
And when we say protected, we are not exaggerating. The details are incredible. Her pram, this fancy baby carriage, was monogrammed.
MFOC, Mary Flannery O'Connor.
She was branded from infancy. It's like she was her own little corporation.
And what's so fascinating is how that monogram predicts the logo she would later design for herself as an artist. That bird-like scramble of her initials. She always had this strong sense of self, of her own importance.
But the protection went even further. As a baby, she was kept in something called a kiddie coop.
A kiddie coop. It sounds vaguely sinister.
That sounds like something you'd put a chicken in.
Well, you're not far off. It was a real product back then. It was basically a crib, but had a screened lid on it, to keep out the flies and the mosquitoes, which were a big problem in Savannah.
So she was literally in a cage.
She was. And the biographer, Gooch, really zeroes in on this image. He sees it as this grimly predictive symbol. Here's a child who starts her life in a coop, and she grows up to identify more with caged birds than with other children. It's a psychological starting point. She began life behind a screen, looking out at the world.
Wow. And that really seems to have set the tone for her personality. The sources describe young Mary Flannery as having what was the phrase? You leave me alone or I'll bite you complex.
She was not the sweet, smiling Southern belle in training. Not by a long shot.
No. She was pigeon-toed, she had a receding chin, and she was fiercely, fiercely critical from a very young age. I love that she was writing book reviews as a little kid.
And they were brutal.
Mm-hmm.
She called Alice in Wonderland awful and terrifying.
Which is just hilarious considering the kind of fiction she would go on to write. You'd think she'd love it.
But she didn't. She preferred little men. She had these very specific, very rigid tastes. She wasn't into whimsy or fantasy. She wanted something grounded, or maybe something she felt she could control.
And she didn't want to be controlled herself. There's that great detail about how she just refused to go to the playground. She wouldn't even walk through the local cemetery with the other kids, which was apparently a popular pastime.
She would rather stay in her room and draw chickens.
And she drew them, quote, beginning at the tail.
There it is again, the backward walking chicken. It's not just a one-off story, it's an instinct. She approached the world from the opposite direction.
But to really get a handle on how this personality was formed, we have to talk about her parents, Regina and Ed, because they were oil and water.
Absolute polar opposites.
Yeah.
And she was caught right in the middle.
So let's start with her mother, Regina Klein O'Connor. She came from a very wealthy, established family in Milledgeville. She was sassy, sophisticated.
She was a force of nature. There's that amazing story about her as a child when some stranger commented on her and she just snapped back, "I've got the biscuits. Have you got the honey?"
That's Regina in a nutshell. Practical, social, the absolute disciplinarian of the family. She was the one who was trying to mold little Mary Flannery into a perfect Southern-style little girl.
Which was a losing battle from the start.
A total losing battle. There were constant fights over things like propriety, acting like a lady, smiling at the neighbors. And the big one was wearing hose to her piano recitals.
Regina really represented the social order, the proper way of doing things. She was the anchor to the reality that Flannery was always in some way trying to escape.
And then on the other side, you have her father, Edward Francis O'Connor. Ede.
The dreamer.
Yes, the soft heart. The one who got her.
He was this handsome, charming man, a World War I vet, commander of the local American Legion. But he struggled in business. He was in real estate, which was a tough game during the Depression.
And none of that mattered to Flannery. The crucial thing was their bond. He loved her, as the biography says, just as she was. He wasn't trying to fix her pigeon toes or her prickly attitude. He celebrated it.
And that kind of validation is it's everything for a creative child, especially one who already feels like an outsider. He gave her permission to be herself.
They were co-conspirators. You get this sense of them ganging up against the strictness of the world, against Regina's rules. And Ed, he'd wanted to be a writer himself. He just never really had the chance.
So he poured all that creative energy into his daughter. He would write her these playful little notes and sign them King of Siam.
And she'd write back, signing her notes, Lord Flannery O'Connor.
Lord Flannery. Even as a child, she's playing with authority, with gender. It's incredible.
So you have this perfect dynamic for a future writer. Ed provided the safety she needed to be weird, to be creative, and Regina?
Regina provided the friction. She gave her something to push against, to rebel against. You see this pattern over and over with great artists. You need that unconditional love to feel safe enough to create, but you also need some kind of conflict to have something to write about.
She had the sanctuary of her father and the battlefield of her mother.
Perfectly put. It was the engine of her early life.
But that perfect engine, that happy conspiracy between father and daughter, It couldn't last. And this is where we get to the real tragedy that defined her adolescence. It starts very quietly, with a physical symptom on Ed O'Connor that the family tried to ignore.
It starts with a whitish patch on his forehead. And at the time, nobody really knew what it was. Or if they did, they certainly didn't tell a young Flannery.
It was lupus, the red wolf, as it was called, an
Hmm.
autoimmune disease where your body just it attacks itself. And in the 1930s, there were no real treatments, no steroids. It was essentially a death sentence, just a very slow and painful one.
And this illness hits right as the Great Depression is gutting his real estate business. It's a double blow. He's losing his health, and he's losing his ability to provide for his family.
And it forces them to make a huge change. In 1938, they have to leave Savannah. They leave this, relatively cosmopolitan coastal city, and they move to Milledgeville.
And if you're not from Georgia, it's hard to overstate what a different world Milledgeville was.
It's a totally different vibe. It was the old state capital, sure, but by the late 30s, it was this sleepy little town known for three things.
The military school, the women's college, and the lunatic asylum. Central State Hospital, which was this massive institution, almost a city within the city.
And to top it all off, the city council had officially designated Milledgeville a bird sanctuary.
You can't make this stuff up. The irony is just too perfect. Flannery later used that on her return addresses, almost like a private joke, this sanctuary that's home to an asylum and a military academy.
So they move into the Klein mansion. This is Regina's family home. And the description of this place, it's like a set from a Southern Gothic movie.
It absolutely is. You've got this big antebellum house, high ceilings, these stern portraits of mustachioed ancestors on the walls, and it's ruled by women. These strong, slightly terrifying matriarchs, Aunt, Sister, and Duchess.
It's a house of women.
And that's the crucial shift. Her father, Ed, is sick. He's fading. He's losing his power, his status as the head of the family. And suddenly Flannery is plunged into this intensely matriarchal environment. It's a manless world, at least in terms of power.
And you see that everywhere in her fiction later on, don't you? All these farms run by widows, all these fatherless children, these powerful, domineering mothers.
She was living inside her future source material. She watched her beloved father just fade into the background of this house that was completely run by these strong Klein women.
And then, in 1941, the thing they've been dreading finally happens. Ed O'Connor dies. He's only 45 years old.
Flannery is just 15. And her reaction, at least on the surface, is just unbelievably stoic. She tells her mother, he's better off. And after that, she basically never spoke of him again.
That seems so, cold, repressed. This was her person, her co-conspirator.
I think it was just a grief that was too massive to articulate. It was so deep it had to be buried. But if you look at her work, her father is the invisible man who haunts every single story.
The source material has that incredible line about how her fiction is filled with the eraser marks of all these dead fathers.
That's it, exactly. She couldn't talk about him, so she wrote around him. His absence creates this vacuum at the center of her stories that her characters are always desperately trying to fill, usually with violence or some misguided quest. It's the silence where the father should be that drives the plot.
So here she is, a teenager, fatherless, stuck in Milledgeville in this house full of aunts. And she has to somehow navigate high school and then college. And she does it in the most Flannery way imaginable.
She becomes a cartoonist.
Right. She doesn't call herself a writer yet. Her primary identity is as a visual artist. She does these linoleum block prints.
Which is a very physical, almost aggressive art form, isn't it? You're not painting delicately.
Yeah.
You're gouging at the material.
That's a great point. And she uses this art form to rebel against the one thing she truly hated.
Progressive education.
Oh, she loathed it. She despised all the activities, hated gym, hated home economics. She saw all this forced socialization as a complete and utter waste of her time.
And that attitude leads to what might be my favorite story in the entire biography, the duck anecdote.
It is legendary. It is the perfect distillation of her humor and her rebellion.
So she's in her home ec class, and the final assignment is that they have to sew a garment to pass. Most of the girls are making aprons or simple skirts.
Practical things a good Southern girl should know how to make. But not Mary Flannery.
No. She decides she is going to sew a full outfit of underwear for her pet duck.
A full outfit. And she doesn't just sew it, she brings the duck to class.
Modeling the little outfit.
And the best part, she passed the class.
Of course she did. What could the teacher even do? It's the ultimate act of malicious compliance. She fulfilled the letter of the assignment. She sewed a garment, but she did it in a way that completely mocked the spirit of the assignment and the whole idea of home ec.
And her cartoons were doing the same thing. She was drawing the local college students, the Jessies. She drew the Waves, the Navy women who were training on campus during the war. And she created these recurring characters.
A short, fat, bossy girl and a tall, thin, kind of dumb bunny sidekick.
Which feels like her splitting her own personality, or at least her perception of the world, into two. She's the outsider observing and caricaturing the social dynamics she's forced to live in.
And this is the period where she really develops that MFOC monogram we talked about. She scrambles her initials into the shape of a bird. To most people, it just looked like a bird. But her close friends knew it was a chicken.
It was her brand. It was her secret handshake, her way of saying, I am this eccentric artistic person, and I am not the Southern lady that my mother is still desperately trying to turn me into.
And speaking of that Southern lady ideal, her social life was, well,
Pretty much non-existent. The biography says dating was almost a foreign concept. She famously said she had a tin leg when it came to dancing.
she was just socially awkward. But she had this incredible intellectual armor. You see it in her letters. Whenever romance or a social situation failed, her fallback was, I can always be a PhD.
It was a defense mechanism, but it was also the truth. She was burying herself in books. She was reading understanding fiction. She was having these intense intellectual debates with her professors, like a guy the students called Dr. Hebe.
Dr. Beiswanger. And he recognized what she was right away. He said she didn't argue like a student, she argued as an anthropologist.
She was studying the species.
Exactly. Observing the strange rituals of the natives, not participating in them.
There was one little exception, though, a Marine sergeant named John Sullivan.
Right. And what's interesting there is that she described their relationship as a comradeship. It wasn't about passion or romance. It was about wit. He got her humor. It proved she could connect with someone, but it had to be on her terms, on an intellectual level.
But ultimately, her ambition was just too big for Milledgeville. She graduates from the Georgia State College for Women, and she sets her sights on a place that must have seemed like a different planet to her family.
Iowa.
The Iowa Writers' Workshop. This is the big leap into the unknown. It's 1945. She travels north, and the scene of her first meeting with the head of the workshop, Paul Engel, is just, it's pure Flannery.
Oh, it's a scene straight out of a movie. She walks into his office, and she's clutching this beat-up handbag. She's got this incredibly thick Georgia accent, which to a Midwestern ear in 1945 was basically a foreign language.
And she's so shy, so terrified, and so completely unintelligible to him that she can't even speak her request.
She has to write it down on a little pad of paper.
Can you imagine? She slides it across his desk. My name is Flannery O'Connor. I am not a journalist. Can I come to the writer's workshop?
The courage that must have taken to be so paralyzed by your own accent and your shyness, but to have this iron will underneath it that just pushes you forward anyway.
And Engel, to his great credit, he looks past the shyness. He reads the stories she brought with her, and he gets it instantly. He saw that the writing was, in his words, imaginative, tough, alive. He let her in on the spot.
But getting in was the easy part. Actually living there. That was a whole other story. The culture shock had to have been immense.
Oh, brutal. You have to picture Iowa City in the winter for a girl from Georgia. The book describes these sooty, tubercular-looking houses, sub-zero temperatures, and the campus is full of Quonset huts for all the veterans coming back from the war.
And she's completely alone. She's living in a little room. And the sources say she basically survived on sardines she ate out of the can. She would just sit there warming her hands over the radiator because it was the only source of heat.
She was profoundly homesick. But here's what makes her a great writer. She didn't write a story about a homesick girl from Georgia.
No, that would be too direct, too sentimental for her. Instead, she writes one of her first great stories, The Geranium.
Which is about an old Southern man who's been dragged up to New York City to live with his daughter, and he's miserable and displaced.
Exactly. She took her own emotion, that feeling of being trapped, of being in a cold, alien place, of longing for home, and she projected it onto a character who was completely different from herself, an old man. By distancing the emotion, she was able to master it and turn it into art.
That's the leap, isn't it? From diary entry to fiction.
That is the leap.
And while she's there, she's also learning to find and defend her voice, often against some pretty stiff criticism from these literary heavyweights.
Right. There's the famous incident with John Crow Ransom, the great critic. He's reading one of her stories aloud to the workshop class, but when he gets to the N-word, he just stops. He refuses to say it.
And this is such a pivotal and obviously very complicated moment. How did she react?
She defended it. Not the sentiment behind the word, but the realism of it. She stood up and said, essentially, the people I was writing about would never use any other word. For her, it wasn't about being polite or palatable. It was about being true to the world she was depicting, warts and all. She felt that if she cleaned up the language, she was lying about the reality of the racism in that culture.
That commitment to the ugly truth got her into other kinds of awkward situations, too. There's a story about her lovely lack of knowledge when it came to romance.
That was Paul Engel again. She had written a seduction scene in one of her stories, and it was apparently so completely, comically unrealistic that Engel felt he had to intervene.
He took her out to his car.
He took her out to his car to explain, basically, the mechanics of seduction, that it just doesn't happen the way she wrote it. I mean, can you imagine how mortifying that must have been?
It's painfully awkward, sitting in a car with your professor while he explains how people flirt.
It is. But it shows you where her genius was and where it wasn't. She didn't understand social romance, but she understood spiritual violence. She didn't know how a man seduced a woman, but she knew instinctively how a self-proclaimed prophet could condemn an entire town.
And she had to fight for the right to write about that dark stuff, even with herself. She was still a very devout Catholic.
So devout that she actually went to a priest in Iowa City and confessed that she was worried her writing was a sin. She's writing about murder, cruelty, hypocrisy. She was afraid she was dwelling on evil.
And the priest gave her the most liberating advice possible.
He did. He basically told her, you don't have to write for 15-year-old girls.
He gave her permission.
He gave her permission to be dark,
Oh.
to be violent, to explore the fallen world without flinching. He essentially validated her work as a vocation, telling her that writing the truth about human nature, even the ugliest parts, wasn't a sin, it was a duty.
And right around this time, Mary Flannery makes a final transformation. She becomes simply Flannery.
She dropped the Mary. She said she felt it made her sound like an Irish washerwoman. Flannery was stronger, more ambiguous, more professional.
And it worked. Editors who read her stories in slush piles often sent rejection slips addressed to Mr. Flannery O'Connor.
Because the stories were so tough, so unsentimental, so lacking in any kind of domesticity, they just assumed a man had to have written them.
And she was starting to prove them all wrong. She wins the Reinhardt Award for her novel in progress, which is going to become Wise Blood. She's no longer just a weird girl from Georgia. She's stepping onto the national literary stage.
It's an incredible journey. From the little girl teaching a chicken to walk backward to this young woman in a muskrat coat winning major literary prizes, but that core tension is always there.
The tension between the protected life, the pram, the ants, the church, and this ferocious imagination that just refused to look away from the darkness.
She was a complete contradiction, a quiet, dutiful daughter who wrote stories about patricide and con men.
So, as we wrap this up, let's leave with one final image. We started with the backward walking chicken, but there's another image from her time in Iowa that I think says just as much.
The picnic photograph.
The picnic photo. It's a group picture taken at Paul Engel's house. All the writers are there. And Flannery is hidden. She's standing behind another person, and you can't see her face at all. The only part of her that's visible in the photograph is her right knee.
And Paul Engel, when he looked at that photo years later, he said something so strange and so perfect.
Yeah.
He said there was a spirit about that knee.
A spirit about that knee.
It's a funny line, but it's also incredibly profound. Flannery O'Connor was a person who hid herself from the world. She hid behind her mother, she hid behind her books. Later, she hid behind her crutches when lupus finally caught up with her, just as it had with her father.
Well, but in her fiction.
In her fiction, she revealed everything. She stripped human nature down to its absolute, naked, often horrifying core.
So you're left with this question. How does a writer who hides herself so completely in person manage to reveal the absolute, unvarnished truth of humanity in her work? And maybe the backward walking chicken wasn't just a party trick. Maybe it was a way of seeing, a way of looking at the world from an angle nobody else would ever dare to take.
Exactly. She looked at the world and she didn't flinch. She saw grace in the most grotesque places.
Yeah.
And she grabs you by the collar, and she makes you look, too. She forces you to stare right at the chicken, even when you'd much rather look away.